Hi everyone, and welcome to this information session with Uppsala University. My name is Lina. I'm here from the Division for Internationalization, and I'm joined here today by our Honorable University Guide, Mr. Mikael Norrby.
Thank you.
And today's topic will be, our university guide will basically tell you a little bit about the university's history. As you probably know, Uppsala University was founded in 1477, so it is the oldest university in Sweden and in basically the Nordic countries. So we have a long and prestigious history. We're not going to be able to go through all of it today because then you would sit here for 10 plus hours probably, but Mikael will give you some highlights. And yeah, this is our last webinar that we will hold before the upcoming Christmas and New Year's holidays in Sweden. So with that, I will hand over to Mikael, and just to remind you that you can submit questions for him using the Q&A button at the end, sorry, at the bottom of your screen. So where it says Q&A, you can write questions to Mikael. Yes, with that, I will hand over to Mikael. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, and good day to all of you. And my absolute apologies for me existing in darkness. I have my office in a 19th century building with dark walls, dark furniture, and quite honestly, it's dark outside. So it will be dark around me, but hopefully we will center on my pictures. So with that, I hope I remember how to do this. Aha. This is a rather, shall we say, arranged picture of Uppsala as you see it today. Actually, well, not actually today, but as it would be in the middle of the summer. It partly to give you just a general idea of how flat the landscape is around. It's an old lake bed, and also that we're talking about two very different parts of town. It's divided by the river, and on the left-hand side you see the new part, which have these absolutely straight street pattern, everything at right angles, and then on the other side with the cathedral, the castle, and most of the buildings of the university, it's very different. The streets are narrow, winding, and going in all possible directions. And let's see if I can get this. Also, before going any further, I should like to point out that most of the pictures you will see will look like this. This is the main building of the university, and as you see from the tulips, this must be a picture taken in May or early June. This is one of the type of pictures. You will see a lot of those. Or they may be like this, and this is probably mid-December. The snow is white, the sky is blue, and yes, this happens. But I have been totally unable to find any pictures showing you our important buildings a rainy day in November, or a day in the beginning of March when all the snow is turning to grayish slush and everyone's feet are wet. So please accept, I'm not trying to sell you a false picture. It's simply that I can't find all the pictures I would have needed showing you all the weathers you would need, because this is possibly the most important thing I will tell you. Uppsala and Uppsala University by default is a place with 4 seasons. There is a winter, there is a summer, there is fall and spring, and the climate is different. That you may read up in books and you will hear it from other people, but the one thing I really want you to be prepared for is this. This is actually a picture from last year. The strange things in the upper left corner is actually reflections from a window. Don't disregard that. This is Uppsala. on the 22nd of December last year at 2:45. The sun is about to set. This is, of course, the darkest day of the year, and that year we had no snow this early, so it was dark. So this is a thing to keep in mind. 4 seasons and quite a bit of darkness until the snow comes, at least. The darkness can actually be quite nice, but it takes a little to get used to, so please be prepared. But with that, I think I shall probably start going into the history bit itself, and back to summer, and back to a place just 6 kilometers north of here. This is Old Uppsala. This is the burial mounds, according to the traditions of the kings Aun, Egil, and Eskil. Well, maybe not, but that's what the stories say. There's more than 600 graves out there. And if the cameraman had turned 180 degrees round, he would have been able to take a picture of Uppsala, just across the fields, but 5.5, 6 kilometers away. This is the historical beginning. This is where the first village of Uppsala sprung into existence as a royal winter capital 1500 years ago. You see perhaps the roof of the church sticking up at the very top of the picture. It's a lovely place. It's a protected area now, and 6 kilometers is a long walk, but it's a short bicycle ride, and that place is open to the public all year round. So it's a lovely place for walks and, well, this time of year, skiing or sledding or whatever. But there it all begins. And then we have this map. This is the only known contemporary portrait of the Archbishop Jakob Ulfsson, the man who founded the university. 1477, the problem of brain drain started to affect the Church of Sweden. All suitable young men within the church who were considering higher education for advancement, they left for Europe. And Latin was the international language of the church and of education. So if you had your Latin, there really was no main reason to go back to Sweden. So most of these young men stayed in Europe. And the Archbishop was a bit, well, annoyed and had a university created. We actually have the original document giving the rights and privileges, and it is signed off on the 6th of October, 1477. So we have an official birthday. We have not yet, there's a group of us lobbying for cake that day. We have not quite yet reached that point, but working on it. The university was, to start with, very much an affair for the church. And the university was located just next to the cathedral, and the cathedral is in the middle of Uppsala. If you look closely in the picture, just in front of the 2 towers of the cathedral, you can see a building with a rather strange green cupola in the middle of the roof. That's the Gustavianum, the oldest building still standing. But the main building of the university was actually alongside the cathedral, where you have a rather conspicuous square marked out with a bit of greenery in the middle. There stood the original building. But of that, there is nothing left today. The map, this is early one, 1702, gives you an idea of how the city, how small the city actually was. 8 blocks across, population of perhaps 2,000. And the castle and the cathedral, they really were the 2 big buildings. Uppsala served as the seat of the archbishop, still does, and one of the most important royal castles in the country at that time. It served as capital for perhaps half the year the king was moving about. And the old main building, you have it here on the left side, the Carolinian Academy. that building is sadly gone, but the other two medieval buildings, they are still with us in other forms today. All in all, I will be talking about more than 260 buildings in Uppsala. Not all of them old, quite a few of them are very modern, but you'll see some of them. I will not do all, I promise that. The Gustavianum is the oldest one that still stands and is still in use. It was built somewhere around 1620, but on a medieval foundation. It's actually two buildings that have been joined together. If you feel slightly seasick from this picture, it plays with your mind a bit. It's because the photographer have been trying so desperately to get the building straight. Actually, everything is leaning. The building is leaning a little, the street is leaning a lot, but well, the photographers settled for a straight house. So it's not quite as abrupt as the picture gives you the idea. And this house in the 1600s, that was the main university building. You had kitchen, storage, classrooms, dormitories, and library, all in one house. And then, of course, the cupola. We kind of like the cupola. It's a lot of pictures. It's kind of a symbol for the university. If you have been here, you know about it. And it is a bit mystical. And especially the ball on the top with the numbers. And it was actually a sundial. The ball itself used to be in brightly polished brass, and you followed the line between sun and shade until it reached the numbers, and that would tell you what time it was. Good planning, apart from the fact that someone has to keep it polished and that you need the sun, and that doesn't always happen in Uppsala, I'm sorry to say. Inside the cupola, you have the anatomical theatre. And that's the place where medical operations and autopsies were performed. And the theatre is still preserved today. The whole building is a museum, sadly at the moment closed for renovation. They're working on it daily. So with the hope, next year, possibly, fingers crossed. The theater was built by this man. This is, I'm going to mention and show you a couple of portraits, and they are all people that have entire campus areas named after them today, or should have. This is Olof Rudbeck, really the great mind of the late 1600s in Uppsala, a man who was professor of theoretical medicine, practical medicine, but also was ready to teach history, architecture, mechanics, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, music, and probably something else. A man with rather wide, a mind that could go almost anywhere. In linguistics, he came up with a fantastic idea that Sweden is the remains of the sunken continent Atlantis, and that all world civilization starts with Sweden. He's performing an autopsy of a world map here, as you can see, and he proves, as you can also see to the very astonished people around him, the existence of a large island in the middle of the Baltic. That's Atlantis, of course, the lost civilization. All languages in the world are Swedish dialects. And surprise, surprise, the capital of Atlantis did not actually sink. It is Uppsala. So he provided us with a glorious creation myth as well. This was happily believed in Sweden in the 1660s. And well, the rest of Europe was laughing, but Rudbeck was an interesting man. I should defend him. He was trying to squeeze the entire world into 6,000 years, because that was the only time that the Bible would give for the entire creation and all the time that the Earth had existed. So he did miscalculate quite badly, but he came up with some totally new discoveries, especially in linguistics. But I think we leave Rudbeck for the moment and go to this perhaps a bit more gentle fellow. This is Anders Celsius. professor of astronomy and physics. And this is, of course, what most people remember about him. In the very front of the picture, you have his prototype for the centigrade scale thermometer, one with mercury. He also made one with spirits. We had both. And you may see in the back of the picture, there is a small pamphlet with a building. And that building actually looked like this. And that's the astronomical observatory. And most of that building is still standing today in the middle of, really the middle of Uppsala, on the pedestrian street. Very few people observe it today, but it's there. And that's the first purpose-built observatory in Scandinavia. The third of the classical three is Carl von Linnaeus, a man we think about as a botanist, but who actually was professor of theoretical medicine. All doctors were supposed to know medicine, as the plants would provide most of your medications. So it was quite natural to have a professor of medicine teaching botany. Now, the problem was, of course, that Linnaeus was not very interested in teaching medicine. He was much more interested in teaching botany alone. And here in Uppsala, he created the classification system that you see here. This is picture of just one of the thousands of stickers that I used in the botanical garden here in Uppsala today, giving the name of a plant according to the Linnaean system with family and subspecies and so on. And you have the classes, the 24 classes and their subclasses. And on the right-hand side, rather fancifully written, you have the letter L. This is one of the plants named by Linnaeus himself. He named more than 12,000 species. Probably the best known name Linnaeus came up with was Homo sapiens, as he also placed humans in his system. In Uppsala, he left a large botanical garden, which I couldn't help myself by including 2 pictures. And also outside the city is his summer residence at Hammarby, which is almost exactly preserved as it was when he died in 1778. So this is a rather special place to visit early spring through the summer and into the beginning of the autumn. It's the property of the university these days, so access for students tends to be quite easy if you can get there. It's a bit outside the city. Linnaeus walked his students there, so shouldn't be a problem. There is also a new botanical garden, a very much larger one. It's barely 250 years old, so it had nothing to do with Linnaeus. It's actually his students and their students who built it. And the big building down in the bottom of the picture is Linnaeanum, named after Linnaeus, of course, which was the Department of Systematic Botany. The botany department is now a bit further down, but still in connection to the park, so tradition live on. And sorry, this is a horrible picture, but I just wanted to tell you that there is also a tropical greenhouse. And why am I telling you this? Well, 3 days ago, it was -20 in Uppsala, and then a tropical greenhouse is a lovely place to have. Another of the buildings you should know about, and much more appropriate picture for the time, is Carolina Rediviva, the main university library. There are now a number of libraries connected to the university for the various disciplines, but Carolina is the main library, and it is the main, partly the hub for all the libraries and also the Center for the Humanities. And I think I'll give you a picture without snow and Christmas trees as well, partly because I want you to remember the balcony. As you see from this picture, the building is at the top of a hill, and the balcony is there at the very front. Please remember that. When you go inside, there is the classical reading rooms. These are actually now used for representation more than anything else. There are modern reading rooms through the building. It's a huge library. It's a It's a really good environment to work in. And strangely enough, it's fairly empty. I have no idea why students prefer to sit crammed into the corridors of the various campus areas rather than walk 250 meters to the library instead. But, well, I may be old-fashioned. The same set of rooms from above. Now, this picture may take a bit of sorting out. You are now, or rather the photographer was standing on the balcony. And I think by now you have realized this is people. Everything is people. Everything that isn't a house or clearly a tree is people. And as you see, the street leading away is full. This is, by a low estimate, somewhere between 50 and 60,000 people. The entire population of Uppsala is 200,000, and that's counting in quite a bit of countryside around. Why is a third of the city's population in one place? Well, this is the last of April, the student carnival. And exactly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Vice Chancellor steps out on the balcony, brings out his white student cap, summer version. There's a gray winter version, very few people use that. He brings out the summer cap, he waves it and puts it on his head, thereby proclaiming spring has arrived. And after a rather long Scandinavian winter, you are prepared to celebrate spring, I can assure you. All of last of April is filled with things you should do if you're a student at Uppsala University. And I must say, it usually takes possibly a year or two, probably 2 or 3 attempts before you manage to do all of them, because, well, some of the students gets a bit tired. And, well, let's not develop that any further. There might be some alcohol involved. Back to history. This is one of the two Ångströms, both of them professors of physics, and this is the elder, the father, and he's the one responsible for this rather small measuring units. There is a number of units named after people from Uppsala, so physics and chemistry became a big subject in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th here in Uppsala. But before going further on to that, there is one more building in the center of the city that has to be described. And that's, of course, the main building. Actually, as you see the picture right now, I am up on the second floor in the left-hand corner of the building, partly obscured by the tree. That's where I have my office. So that's where I'm seated right now. The problem is, of course, it's dark outside. This building was created as a birthday present for the university on the occasion of the 400th anniversary in 1877. Inside, you have a number of classrooms, you have offices, and perhaps, well, this rather lovely entrance. But perhaps the most important of the rooms inside is the large aula, Aula Magna. This is a place that seats almost 2,000 people, and just about all the big events that happens over the academic year is in there. What is about to happen here is the conferment of doctorates, which happens twice a year. And I think this is actually a picture of the same event. You always know it's doctoral conferment if you see the white cathedra, the lecture stand in the middle. Otherwise, it's a brown one, but the white for the doctorates. And, well, who knows? This may be you in a number of years. The ceremony has been the same for a couple of 100 years, and you end up by receiving your diploma, your hat, or your laurels, depending on what subject you are. And then, after having been led across the cathedra by your tutor, you end up by bowing to the audience, but especially to the chancellor representing the university. Now, the newer parts of the university is spreading all over the city. Most buildings we have seen up till now, they have been in the very center, close to the cathedral. But as the university started to spread, especially in the 1960s, it started to grow enormously. A number of new buildings came into existence. This is the biomedical center, and this was built to the university's 500th anniversary in 1977. And well, from the name Biomedical Center, I think you can understand what's going on there. Across the road from it, you have the Ångström Laboratory, where you have most of the sciences these days. This is a slightly old picture. Actually, it's quite old. I have to replace this one, mostly because you actually see two parking lots, one in the lower end of the picture and one in the upper end of the picture. Both of them have built over by now. And this is the latest addition with building 10 out at Ångström. So now the science people are all more or less collected in these two enormous buildings. And this addition was opened less than 6 months ago. There is also the new humanistic theater. Looks fun on pictures. It's also a very good high-tech auditorium inside. And then, of course, it is the new administration building, the Segerstedt. And I think many of you will probably have your first experience with Uppsala University inside this house. This is now barely 5 years old. And the trendy thing in Scandinavian architecture these days is that there has to be a big central staircase. And there is. Just about 10 years ago, there was another addition to the university. These buildings are not in Uppsala. They are 220 kilometers away, and they're on the island of Gotland, the big island in the middle of the Baltic Sea. This used to be a small independent university college off the island of Gotland. But in 2013, there was a merger between Uppsala University and that local university college, and they became Campus Gotland. And they are located just down by the harbor in a number of buildings that used to be industrial. What you see in front of you is the, well, orange-pink building used to be a matchstick factory. The gray one, a malt factory. There was a foundry. There was not military barracks. All of that has been converted into a university campus. And just to make things absolutely clear, Gotland is an island 220 kilometers away, no bridge, no tunnel. You get there by boat or by flying. So this is the thing. You can study in Uppsala or you can study in Visby, but in both cases you're studying at Uppsala University, but make certain that you understand the difference. Visby is, as a city, older than Uppsala. Visby, I should say, is probably the first modern city, or the first place we would recognize as a city that springs up in Northern Europe. End of the 1100s, beginning of the 1200s. The city wall is still there, 3.5 kilometers of it, well preserved. And yes, maybe not this much snow. Snow on Gotland tends to be a hit or miss story. There can be a lot, or there can be none. Gotland is not as cold as Uppsala. Average temperature in February here in Uppsala is around -8. On Gotland is supposed to be -2. But the difference is, of course, that Gotland is, as I already have said a number of times, an island in the middle of the sea, which means that you get wind and quite a bit of wetness from the sea. So it usually feels colder out there. But the wall and the old buildings gives a wonderful feel to the place. It is, of course, one of the absolute #1 summer destinations of the Swedes, but from a historian's point of view, it's a fantastic place. The medieval inner city is surprisingly well preserved. You have the remains of 14 churches, one of them still in action. The cathedral, you can see, St. Mary. The university is at the inner harbor. It's just at the very left-hand corner of this picture. So being a student on Gotland, I'm sorry, these pictures feel very touristic, but to be honest, that's what the place looked like. And when you leave Visby, which I think you should, I realize I'm unfair now because I should have taken pictures of the countryside around Uppsala as well. But when you start to travel on the island of Gotland, you realize that the landscape there is totally different from the rest of Sweden. It's a 50-meter high limestone plateau in the middle of the Baltic. So flora and fauna is quite different. And surprisingly to myself, this is the last picture I had planned to speak on. And this is actually you, or well, not you, but the people who were you 4 years ago. These are newly arrived students in the beginning of September on Gotland. No matter if you come to Uppsala or Stockholm, or Uppsala or Visby, don't go to Stockholm. Forget that. Did not mention Stockholm at all. Visby or Uppsala, that doesn't really matter because you're coming to Uppsala University. This is really the oldest university in, not just in Sweden, but in Scandinavia. You have traditions like you will find nowhere else. The student nations, the grouping of the students into these, how should we say, building complexes, manners, you could almost say, run by the students. You have the two magnificent cities with so much Swedish history and also so much countryside around. In both cases, actually in Visby, you can walk straight into natural reserves just outside the city. In Uppsala, you can take an ordinary city bus and 10-15 minutes, you're outside. You are in the countryside. You in Uppsala, take the right bus, 20 minutes, and you are in a forest that will basically run unbroken all the way up to the Arctic Circle. So don't get lost. But I must say, it is a very different place. I guess it will be a very different place to many of you, with the seasons, with the darkness. But then, of course, the balance of all of this is, come summer, you will have sunlight, not 24 hours. We're not that far north, but you will have it for 22.5 hours or something like that, and that's usually enough. And I think I should stop sharing now because I sort of, there we are. Yes, I am surprised. I thought this should have gone on for much longer, but I apparently was quicker than I had anticipated.
Well, perfect. That leaves time for questions. So we'll go ahead and have a look at the questions we've gotten so far. Let's see. This is a good question. So Aidan is wondering, I was wondering if the university plays a role with regards to the Nobel Prizes. I have read that laureates often speak at the university.
Well, if we start from the point of simply electing the person to receive the next Nobel Prize, a number of the researchers and scientists from Uppsala University sits on the various committees. Usually one or two of the committees are usually headed by people from Uppsala. And yes, the laureates are all invited to come to Uppsala after they have received their prizes. And last week we had, for a 3-day period, of course, Corona has meant that the 2 previous years, the big event has not happened in Stockholm. But of last week we had 1 day for each of these 3 years now when the laureates came, and there should have been a grand total of 8, but sadly, apparently quite a few of them got a cold in Stockholm. So we only were down to 5, which is a bit low for us. So there is a decent chance that you will actually be able to see the laureates here in Uppsala. 13th of December, Lucia, the day which is traditionally regarded as the darkest day of the year. The laureates tend to come to Uppsala and they lecture on campus. There are no tickets. There's just a queue. So whoever is first in line is first into the room. And usually, I've heard this repeated a number of times. The laureates gives basically the same lecture as they do in Stockholm before award ceremonies. But then they tend to be quite nervous, stressed, possibly jet lagged. So the second time they do it here in Uppsala tends to be so much better. And there's a lot of people within the science community who just find various reasons to come to Uppsala to hear it a second time here. But as I said, it's a queue. So whoever is first in line gets in first. Yes.
Great. Let's see. Another question that we got is, can you see the Northern Lights from Uppsala?
You can, although not as frequently as further up north. But as usual these days, there is an app that tracks the Aurora Borealis, and it will give you ample warning. Then the problem is, I'm sorry to say, the city provides quite a bit of light pollution. So you need to either find a corner that shelters you a bit from the rest of the city, or to get a bit outside the city to see it at its best. But oh yes, you can see it. I must admit, I've seen some rather glorious ones over Uppsala, but it does not happen as frequent. So these are one of the things that cannot be guaranteed, but you should have a good chance.
Yeah, and I know also there's a Facebook group for spotting the Northern Lights in Uppsala. So if you don't want to keep track in the app, you can join this group, and other people will keep track of the possibility, and they will warn each other saying like, oh, tonight we have a 95% possibility of seeing the lights. And they can also give advice on where to go to see them best. I know the hills in Gamla Uppsala are a popular spot to see Northern Lights because there's less, I guess, light pollution there. So there are some options. Another question we got is about how accessible the city and the university is for a disabled person, because I understand, of course, seeing this presentation, you might be a bit scared because you see like the cobblestone streets and you see that all the buildings are quite old. So do you want to answer that, Mikael, or should I go ahead?
Well, feel free to start, and I might be able to add something.
Yeah,
you probably know this better.
No, I was just going to say, like, in Sweden in general, we have a fairly strong sort of legal obligations to provide disability access. So all the campus buildings and everything like that, they are adapted to offer access. Of course, the access for an older building might be a bit more complicated. You have to maybe go to a specific door to get where the elevator is and things like that. But for the newer buildings, of course, it's very much easy accessible everywhere, but all buildings like legally have to be accessible.
Yes, and then Uppsala is mostly flat, apart from that one hill or actually it's a ridge line that runs straight across the city. So there will be up and down, but I mean, you can always, there's always ways around it. And the same goes in Visby. It's built on the slope, but there's always ways around. The campuses and the main buildings, they are provided, but as Lina said, sometimes you have to go, perhaps enter from just one corner or so, but there's all you will always be able to get in.
Yes, exactly. And I could also add, like, the public transportation in Uppsala and Visby, that's also, of course, wheelchair accessible and everything like that. That's a legal requirement. So so you don't have to worry about things like accessing public transportation. Let's see, we also got a good question here from Aiden again, who was wondering about the history of the student nations. Were they historically only for students from certain regions, or were they more acting as a cultural exchange between regions?
No, they were incredibly strict. Maybe I should explain. I didn't include them because I was wondering if you had them already. The nations is something that actually existed all over Europe. All the early European universities had them. They were referred to as tongues or nations. And as students in those days were a rather international lot, they traveled. And the idea was that students from the same country would band together, or those who spoke the same language would band together and sort of help and assist each other. The system, when it came to Sweden, was a bit more local. It was depending on which province you came from, or actually which bishopric you belonged to, which was basically more or less the same as the provinces. And originally it was very strict. You had to be born within that province. That, of course, started to soften quite quickly. Today, of the student nations, the 13 of them, 12 doesn't even care. And the 13th that officially requires you to be born or have one parent born within the province have a rather interesting loophole. They require you, if you cannot provide the ancestry, if you can provide a good enough reason to become a member of that nation, you will be allowed as a member of the nation. So it's open for all. The nations, the reason that they came into existence was, of course, this idea that the elder students should be able to help the younger ones. You would be from the same region. So in many cases, you would be related, you would know each other, or else your fathers would know each other. Most of the students in the 1600s, they were here to study theology, they would become priests, or they would study law to become civil servants one way or another. And in many cases, the fathers of the students would have met, perhaps, well, one generation earlier at the nations. So the nations was a good way of communicating back home. If anyone was traveling, he would bring mail, and coming back, he would bring parcels or whatever. So it was a good way of connecting. It probably also helped the parents back home to know that the young men were in safe hands. I keep saying young men because first female did not enter Uppsala University until 1872, which is, of course, 150 years ago, but still, we managed to spend a lot of history without any of them, sadly. So the nations are old. They go back at least to the 1620s, 1630s, 1640s. They were run by the students, but the university was a bit nervous about this, having the students organizing. So it was decided that at every nation there should also be one professor serving as the inspector to make certain that the students behaved. And that setup is still active today. And the nations are very much alive here in Uppsala. The smallest ones are around 200 members. The largest one is actually 16,000 members. And in many cases, you don't leave the nation just because you end your time as a student. I'm still a member of my nation. And that's in many cases how you identify yourself when you meet another Uppsala student. You don't start saying which year you studied or what subject you studied. You start by informing about what nation you belong to. And that can usually be a quite efficient way of quickly establishing if you have any common friends or so. So donations are a very, very important part of life here in Uppsala. And it may be one of the trickiest questions you will have to decide when you come here, what nation to join. Some of the nations allow you to be members in more than one. The membership fee is very small, so that shouldn't be much of a problem. But some are very peculiar and only allow one membership. And I mean, it's if you think that you have picked the wrong one, then it's not a problem. You can just leave it and join a new one the next semester. They have slightly different flavors and inclinations, so you have to do a bit of shopping around before you realize that Gotland Nation is the best one. Sorry. Couldn't help.
Perfect. Yeah, you will, if admitted, you will get a chance to meet and speak with all the student nations and shop around and decide which to join. So definitely you will have the opportunity to learn more about each and every nation before you decide which one to join. I saw we also got a couple of questions about like how diverse the city of Uppsala is, and I just want to say that's something you can probably best discuss at one of our webinars with other international students. They can share their individual experience. I mean, both me and Mikael are from Sweden, so we're not maybe the best authority to speak about diversity in Uppsala or in Sweden in general. But I can say Uppsala has a large immigrant population, so you would definitely not feel out of place. There are supermarkets that have food from various regions in the world. There's a mosque, there's a Catholic church, and so on. So there are also options for expressing various religions. So I would say it is a fairly diverse city, but of course, I mean, Sweden is still maybe not the most diverse country in the world. So but yeah, I think in general I would say Uppsala is a good choice because it's a very academic city. We have a lot of people coming into internationally to teach at the university and to study at the university, so it is quite a diverse environment due especially to the universities in the town. Another question that we got, I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions, then we actually have to end this session. I see we have quite a lot of questions, but if we're not able to answer your question live, you can just email us at masterprograms@uu.se. So one question we got from your presentation, Mikael, is that one student is wondering, is the university still under the stewardship of the church, or is it now autonomous from the church?
That ended. That actually ended more than 200 years ago. So totally independent. Although I must say the Archbishop lives next door. So at least I'm still getting my mind around that we now have a male Archbishop again. We have had a female Archbishop for the past 9 years. But just a couple of weeks ago, they ordained a new Archbishop. The old one retired, and so now we have a he again. And about the previous Archbishop, just to give you perhaps a little pointer, she arrived as an exchange student from Germany and to study philosophy, and then philosophy turned into theology, and then all of a sudden she became a priest in the Church of Sweden. And when she was made bishop, someone asked her, "Are you a Swedish citizen?" Because no one had thought about that. And it turned out that she hadn't actually changed her citizenship. She was still German. That had not been a problem up until the point where she became a bishop, where you theoretically actually have to be a Swedish citizen. So at that point, she took out a dual citizenship. So there are unknown ways of advancing in Sweden. The Church of Sweden is short of priests, so yeah, never know.
Perfect. So that might be a career possibility for you if you want to become the new Swedish bishop. Let's see. I think we had 2 more questions that I was gonna cover before we end this session. So one question was about we had it somewhere and now I lost it. I saw also a question about the energy crisis in Europe, which says, how do you guys keep warm with the gas cutoff? And for that, I just want to mention that in Sweden, we don't really use gas for heating. That's done more on the like in continental Europe. So the gas in itself is not really affecting us. However, the energy prices are still quite high due to the joint European Union market for energy. But the gas cutoff from Russia is not affecting Sweden at all, basically. Another question here, I found it. So this is a question about Vikings, which of course is the best part of Swedish history. And the question is basically, does oral Swedish history also tell of the great temple in Uppsala?
Now, this is a question that could take a very, very long time. The temple is, of course, described, the Old Uppsala temple is described in the writings of a German bishop. Based on what he had been told by people who had been there and by various missionaries. And over the past years, this has been interpreted and reinterpreted. Is it really a temple? Is it possibly more a hall for festivities? And archaeological digs that have taken place out at Old Uppsala have actually made things more complicated. They have excavated an enormous festivity hall, a building more than 70 meters long. That is a big wooden building that probably was built around 800 and destroyed within roughly 110 years. There's a second building that's not much smaller, standing a bit lower down on the slope. They may have been the halls meant, but there is also the constant nagging feel that there is a church standing out there. The church that actually was the first cathedral in Uppsala, out in Old Uppsala. That building stands on top of something, and that something was excavated, sadly, in a rather sloppy way in the 1920s. What they found under it was a large square wooden building that had been destroyed by fire. And of course, everyone said, haha, the temple burnt down and then the church built on top. But then people started to point out that it could equally possible be an early church. Looking at the earliest church buildings we know about in Scandinavia, and of course some of them still survive in Norway as these staff churches, they tend to be square, and the measurements are quite similar. So we have really no idea, but there really was no oral history as such until the 1600s, when this German text came back and when the first translations or the first editions of Snorre Sturlason, the Icelandic saga writers, started to come back into Scandinavia. And then an enormous debate started. And I should say it's still going on. So now there is a very rich tradition, but it's based on the last 300 years, 400 years perhaps. And Olof Rudbeck, who I mentioned, he had his absolute own ideas. He had his own ideas about everything. But archaeology and the field of Old Uppsala is very, very much alive here in Uppsala. I should say it's one of the best places to do archaeology in the country. And Old Uppsala is there. And the digs carry on. And there's almost something new every year out there. So it's an exciting place.
Perfect. Thank you. I promised one more question, so we're going to do that, but then we really have to end, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. So this is a difficult question, but I'm going to give it to you, Mikael, and we'll see what you say. So what are your top 5 recommendations for things to do for brand new students who have never been to Uppsala?
Well, there is, of course, a couple of buildings that cannot be missed. The main building and the cathedral, they are so central in the city, you have to see them. Old Uppsala, I spent so much time talking about it, so it would be strange not to mention it. Then I should say, you should also, this may sound a bit strange, but you should also look properly at the city. I find a lot of students who tend to sort of end up, basically have one corridor, transport corridor from their home to their department, and then to their nation, and then back home again. No, you should really see the city, because Uppsala is a very good example of how a Swedish city has developed. From the medieval center, how it expanded in the 19th century, and then how the various areas of planned new buildings in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the welfare state, and the various stages in that. We have some of the absolutely best planned suburbs in Sweden, I should say probably in Scandinavia here, and we have some of the worst. And there's a time difference in 20 years between them, and all that comes as, if you're into this, I'm sorry, I'm an architectural historian by training, so I tend to start talking about buildings all the time. But then I should also say the countryside around the city. There is so much. You have the large lake system, Lake Mälaren, the 3rd largest lake in Sweden, which is just a few kilometers downriver. The sea is really not that far. It's roughly 50 kilometers away. You have the dense forests, which is more typical to the north of the country, beginning, say, 20 kilometers north of Uppsala. But go 20 kilometers south of Uppsala, you're in a much more open landscape that you would expect more to the south. So Uppsala is really in a middle point. And then I have to admit, I mean, Stockholm is only 40 minutes away by train. So you have a European capital for little day tours. And then I must admit, I'm very fond of Gotland, so you have to sneak over and do a little tour there as well. I could go on, but I think we should not, because we are reaching the end time I see on my timepiece here.
Yes, we'll end on that note, and I could just add that if you're admitted to the university, we do organize bus tours at the start of the semester, so you can sign up to go on bus tours that actually take you to the countryside, which Mikael just recommended as a good destination. So you can go to Linnaeus' old home outside of Uppsala, you can go to various castles, you can go to our local moose or elk farm, which is usually very, very popular among students. So definitely take advantage to go on those tours, because it's a lot easier to go on a bus tour with us than navigating Swedish public transportation on your own. So we definitely recommend joining us for one of the tours, and Mikael is usually the guide too, so you get to meet him again. So with that, we'll end this session. Thank you so much, Mikael, for joining us and sharing your expertise. And thank you so much to all of the students who attended. Thank you for all of your great questions. Unfortunately, I saw we had a large number of other good questions we've been not able to cover today, but feel free to email us if you still want to know the answer to your question, just masterprograms@uu.se, and we'll stay in touch. But thank you so much for joining today, and thank you, Mikael.
Thank you all, and welcome to come here in due time.
Exactly. We hope to see you in Uppsala next autumn. And happy holidays, of course, regardless of what you celebrate. We hope you will have an enjoyable time over the winter holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye.